How you doing?
Not too bad. Have you heard it is the mascot for the White Band now?
How are you? All right. Nice to see you. Well, I think that's wonderful.
Oh, come on. Oh, come on.
Hard work and joint effort by everybody on Yes Click Manager. We are a grassroots movement and we don't have affiliation or we don't endorse any political parties. We just support Scottish self-determination and campaign for that at a community level. But we also champion a lot of other issues and concerns that are relevant to Alloa and Clackmannanshire. Our most recent campaign, well, I guess it's an ongoing campaign, has been to try and get our local MP to come and answer some questions about universal credit and its rollout locally. We were one of the pilot areas, and there's been a whole host of problems come at the back of this implementation locally. We have submitted a petition to the MP and we are waiting for an invitation to take part in the local action group, where we are going to try and articulate some of the local concerns about universal credit and some of the problems families have been having with it. And the council's perspective, there's a massive increase in rent arrears since the implementation of it, so that's another issue that we're trying to take forward. But in true Yes Clacks tradition, we are just trying to give people a voice over issues that are important. So in this case, universal credit was one that was particularly relevant. Last year we formed a group called Clacks Cares, along with colleagues from the trade union movement, other community activists, not necessarily people who supported independence, to resist the fascists that came to Alloa from the SDL, and to show solidarity with our friends in the Syrian community who had not long moved here. And I think we're probably feeling pretty vulnerable that this nastiness has come into town, and we wanted to be absolutely clear that Clackmannanshire did not welcome fascism in any shape or form, and we would stand up to it, we would actively stand up to it in the streets. And so Clacks Cares was a significant project we got involved with and actively supported, again supporting grassroots where it was needed, where it was required. We've done a number of other initiatives. We've done joint work with our colleagues in Wales through the Welsh Football Supporters for Independence and another Glasgow group called Partick Thistle for Yes, and we did some local campaigning jointly about the need for both our countries to have self-determination and both our countries' needs to break away from the chains of London and Westminster.
So who is your local MP here?
Our local MP is Luke Graham, Conservative Unionist Party.
And you're, all right. And you're,
I'm a member of the Scottish Green Party, and we hope to have representation in the next council elections. And we have quite a strong support in the area. We have Mark Ruskell on the Mid-Scotland and Fife list, MSP, who will be here today at some point, and may well be next door. So we have quite a strong presence in Clackmannanshire, the Greens, and it's building, our membership's building, and the positivity we receive on the doorstep is growing as well. So we are an active group, the Scottish Green Party, in Clackmannanshire and Stirling. We've got a stall next door, and our co-leader will be next up speaking on the stage, Lorna Slater, who will be on about 2 o'clock. talk today to look a bit about how we see a green, independent future for Scotland.
And of course, this is so important to us all now, isn't it? Because the climate has definitely changed. When I was a wee lad up in the north, I mean, it was totally different from what that is now.
I think there's probably an awareness amongst children from primary school about how important the environment is, and an awareness about the dangers. This isn't a problem we can deal with next week. This is a problem that needs dealt with now. It's a climate emergency. It's a priority. It needs dealt with. It can't be put off. It's not something that's abstract. And the fact that you're saying you can identify it through your own experience means how omnipresent it is and why it is a priority.
Scots way, where all is play. Scots van Bruce has oft times led. Welcome to your holy bed. Hearty victory, just dance. Now's the day and now's the hour. See the front of battle, see approach power, Bedford's power, chains and slavery. Why could be a traitor, why could kill a coward's grave? Why say peace to be a slave? Let him serve and play. While for Scotland's care and law, freedom's sword will strongly draw. Free man stand and free man fall, and let him by oppressions arose in peace, by your sons and servant chains. We won't reign at nearest pain, but we shall be free. With a proud and supper low, silence for with every blow. Liberty with every foe, let us follow me. By oppressions, woes and pains, by your sons and servant chains, we won't reign our nearest pains, but we shall be free. Lay the proud and supper low, tyrants fall with every blow. Liberty with every foe, let us do it. Scots we hail, all have fled. Scots and Bruce as all times there. Welcome to your holy bed, hearty victory. I love my sidekick.
So, sir, who are you?
My name's Alec.
Hello, Alec. I like your T-shirt. Tell me all about what it says on there, the slogan.
Says Nicola, use the mandate.
And tell me why you feel that she should.
Because I think Scotland needs independence. I think it's getting to be quite urgent now. I think Brexit is a disaster for the Scots. It's also a disaster for the UK generally. But I think the only way we can address it ourselves is to get independence and get back into Europe where we belong.
And what do you think about the Prime Minister of the UK at the moment?
Boris Johnson, I don't have a lot of confidence in him. I think he's a bit of a nutcase. I don't think he's a very good guy. I don't think his diplomatic skills are anywhere near what they should be for a Prime Minister. I think the language he uses, I think there's an argument to suggest that he's far too right-winged, something of a fascist actually. I don't like the man at all.
It's really quite the opposite position of, I think, most Scots. I don't think most Scots think in that ultra-capitalist way, do you?
I don't know. I'm the opposite. I'm very egalitarian. I believe in redistribution of wealth and an all-inclusive society, which is the opposite of what Boris Johnson believes in, the opposite of what the Tories generally believe in. I don't think they're good for us at all. And that, of course, is another reason why I think we should have independence. We don't vote for the Tories up here. We're voting for them less and less. The only reason they did well last election was because the Labour Party and Lib Dems were happy to vote for them.
Yeah.
So they got a bigger slice of the vote than maybe they should have.
And now, of course, they've lost Ruth Davidson.
Yes, well, I didn't like her either. A lot of folk are saying, well, it could make a difference to them. I don't think it's going to make any difference. I think she was going to lose her 13 MPs in the next general election. So I don't think.
You noticed how, well, it was First Minister's questions yesterday. And did you notice, no, it was the day before Thursday, wasn't it? It's Friday yesterday, it's Saturday today, I lose track of my days. But do you notice that when Jackson Carlaw or surprisingly not Willie Rennie this time because he went on a different tack, but Richard Leonard, they always attack on the same issues, don't they?
Yes.
It's education and the health service. It was the health service they had a bash at this time.
Yes.
They've got nothing else, have they? They've got absolutely nothing else.
Nothing else at all. It's all about SNP bad.
Yeah.
How can we make out that the SNP is so bad? Let's home in on the NHS. And when they identify problems in the NHS, it's problems in England. And they translate it to Scotland and argue, we've got the same problems. We've not got the same problems. The structure in the NHS in Scotland is very different from the structure in England. And that means that we run it differently. And we actually run it better. And then we're just saying that I think we do run it better. It's not perfect, but we do run it a lot better. And we've not got half the problems that the people of England want. But the Tories are in charge in England. It's the SNP in Scotland. And the Tories want to dismantle the NHS. They made that quite clear. It's only a matter of time before they say, OK, let's just get rid of it. And maybe Brexit will do that. They'll get Trump in. They will get his people in to run the NHS. And they'll try and do it here as well if we don't get out of the UK.
So now I'm very, very lucky to be joined by Lorna from the Green Party. But you're the co-convener, aren't you?
Co-leaders. So we've recently had a structural review. We've changed how the party's organised, and we've got some new roles. So Patrick Harvey and I are the co-leaders of the Scottish Green Party.
Now I had the privilege of meeting Patrick a little while ago, and I said to him, I like the way you rattle people, and yeah, seemed to be very amused by that idea. But the importance of this Green Party and rattling the world is, I think, something that's very, very serious, and I think it's something you could probably enlighten people by giving us a little bit of talk about that.
Absolutely. So climate change is real. It's happening now. All the countries in the world who signed the Paris Agreement, we've agreed to work together to try and keep global warming below 2 degrees Celsius. That doesn't sound like very much, and we're not choosing that number because it's a safe number. We're choosing that number because 4 degrees, at 4 degrees is terrifying. At 4 degrees, most coastal cities are inundated. We lose all coral reefs, and there are worldwide food and water shortages. At only 6 degrees, 95% of life on Earth is extinct. So we have to deal with climate change urgently. This isn't something that can wait. And this is why the Scottish government and governments around the world need to have action plans. It's not good enough to have targets to hit zero carbon. We need actual action plans. And the Scottish Greens have developed the Scottish Green New Deal, which is our proposal for an action plan.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you caught these programs, you're probably too busy, but this week on the Channel 4 news programme, they've had some horrific reports from Greenland. One particularly disgusting one last night, with the rubbish that people collect and generate and just dump on the beach. And another one where the Americans have buried their nuclear facilities underneath snow, and the snow is now melting and exposing these things to the world.
Absolutely. We've been treating the world as if it was a renewable resource, and it isn't. We only have one planet. As the Extinction Rebellion say, There is no planet B. If we want our children and grandchildren to have clean air, clean water, thriving economies, then we absolutely have to change what we're doing right now.
And that is an issue, isn't it, the economy? Because obviously anyone who's got any inkling of what economics is in the modern sense of Adam Smith and Maynard Keynes, etc., has to understand a little bit about the word growth. And we require growth because that's how we get people to invest. They look at the future and see that there's a possibility they might get more out of it if they invest now. But that, of course, has this knock-on effect of constantly producing stuff and never really thinking about the consequences of what we are actually producing. Where will we get rid of the batteries for this new cars that they're producing? Is that an issue that you think about?
The growth model of economics is broken. We cannot simply grow. We cannot continue to grow on one planet. It's not sustainable. And we need a new way to think about economics. I actually think it's a myth that our current economy works. I don't think it works at all. I think it works for a few very rich people who then take their money and stash it in tax havens where it doesn't benefit anybody and does no public good. I think in a country where as wealthy as Britain, where people are using food banks, where kids go to school hungry, where schools are having to crowdfund for basic supplies, we can't pretend that our economy is working. So actually, let's not keep things as they are. Let's look to a circular economy or a donut economy where what we put into the system and what we take out of the system are balanced. Because there is no economy on a dead planet. You can't have growth when 95% of life is dead. This is serious. And talking about dated economic policies, ideas that were 150 years out of date are not going to save us in the future. We need modern ideas, and a new way of looking at the future.
Yeah, and one of those aspects of that program I spoke of a few moments ago was they were taking, and I hope this doesn't offend anybody, but it's part of life, they were taking human excrement and putting it into plastic bags and then leaving it on the beach. Now actually, if they had thought about it, it'd be better just to dump the human excrement on the beach. The plastic is the biggest problem in that equation, isn't it? It's this idea of this circular economy that you've just spoken of. Do you think with this battery-powered stuff, how much is the carbon footprint of producing this vehicle against that vehicle, letting the thing run in our atmosphere for several years? And what do they do with all that stuff that comes out of the batteries at the end of the day? And we also know that there's problems pulling out the cobalt that they need and the lithium that they need for these things. I mean, give me a little bit more about that.
So battery technology does have some interesting uses in the future. There are some trends to the conversation that worry me, though. One is the idea that we can just swap out fossil fuel powered cars for electric cars and that'll be the problem sorted, because it won't be. There is inherent carbon budget in the building of cars. There is also chat about how we use our cities. Do we really want to keep our public spaces cluttered up with cars? Do we really want to continue to have so many people and animals killed by cars every year? Electric cars are going to be part of the mix in places where there isn't public transport, but really our conversation needs to be about public transportation, about pedestrianizing city centers so that they can be human spaces and safe for disabled people, old people, children, and other people to access these spaces who don't have cars. I get very frustrated by this idea that electric cars are the big solution. It's got to be bicycles, trains, and buses. You'll know in this part of the country, and this morning I was through in North Lanarkshire.
Yeah.
That's terrible. Through North Lanarkshire. So this morning I was through in North Lanarkshire, and you'll know yourself how difficult it is to get around if you don't have a car. It's very frustrating that the government hasn't invested in buses and trains, which are technologies that not only would boost the economy enormously because people need to be able to get around, but would tackle climate change.
All right then, so gentlemen, I've just seen you on the stage inside the event today here at Clacks in Alloa, and you unfurled a lovely saltire Scottish flag, and you've done something very special for this event. What did you do? You made some cakes and stuff?
I just, I'm sorry, my name is Fuad, I'm from Egypt. I only help my friend, he's from Syria,
And you come all the way from Syria?
Yeah, he's from Syria.
And but what cakes did you make?
Make everything.
No, he make everything. Today, especially, make a flag of Scotland because he want to say thank you for everyone to go to him for Syrian people.
Right. So you've come from Syria.
Yeah.
You're a Syrian refugee.
Yeah.
And you've made this beautiful cake in order to say thank you to everybody who's made you welcome in Alloa.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. So how long have you been here?
2 years.
2 years.
Yeah.
And was it terrible back in Syria when you had to leave the war?
انت مشيت عشان يعني جيت عشان الحرب وبتاع.
عشان الحرب هون أمان.
He said to you when he come here he feeling safe because he have like it's not safe there in this moment, you know what I mean, and he said when he come here everyone it was kind to him and he thanks for everyone because he between you and everyone kind to him.
Yeah.
That was really nice. Come here.
Gentlemen, keep it round.
Thanks very much, Dennis, and thank you to everybody who's taken the time to come along today. Actually, it looks from this side an absolutely fantastic turnout. We have people here from different political parties. We have the SNP, the Greens, the Socialist Party, and many of no party at all, and of course under the umbrella of Yes Clackmannanshire. Now for the SNP, I can say that today happens to be a national day of action, so that means there are people out and about across the country, which perhaps limits the ability of people to come from elsewhere to here today for this march. But I do know one lady I spoke to had come all the way from Nairn, and we have people from different parts of Stirling or central Scotland, so I think this is a fantastic turnout. And also should I say that some people are quite snooty about marches. I think marches are part of our democratic right to show what we believe in, and I think they're a tremendous, peaceful, very joyful occasion today, so well done to everyone for coming along today. Somebody mentioned earlier on the Welsh situation, which is really quite phenomenal. Our poll has showed support for Welsh independence at 41%, and there was a fantastic march and demonstration at Merthyr Tydfil recently. And there was a piece being done on Radio 4 about it this week, and of course they interviewed people at the march. He said it was a great march, very keen to see Wales become independent. And then they went to Stephen Kinnock, and he said, absolutely absurd. We are too small to be a successful country. We have a massive deficit that we need Westminster to make good for us. And really, the problem is, and I think we've heard all these arguments before from a different Kinnock as well, the problem is that everything's been drawn into the southeast of England, London and elsewhere. That's the problem, they said. So what we need to do is stay with the UK, because they're the only ones that are big enough to make sure that Wales, the north of England, Scotland, Northern Ireland get a real deal. Exact same arguments as we've been facing for years, but in a much more unashamed way. You know, sometimes the unionists here in Scotland do get more sophisticated with their arguments. They've kind of shrunk back from saying that we're too wee, too poor, shrunk back from saying it too explicitly. But this was in the raw unionism. We are not good enough, we are not rich enough, we are not big enough, and we need London to sort it out. That's the arguments that they have. Now the point I would make to you today, and the most important point, and we have to carry this beyond the people involved here today, is look at Scotland, look at it objectively. We have got some of the cleanest and best water supplies in the world. We have got huge energy resources, which we have to be careful in how we manage those in a sustainable way. We have an extremely highly educated population. 4 universities in the top 200 in the world, and Dundee University, which is a superb university, just outside the 200. So we've got a highly educated, wealthy country, and yet we're told, we're led to believe the central case of the unionist argument is that we are not rich enough, we're not big enough. Luxembourg, with a population of about 300,000 apparently is big enough. Malta is big enough. Cyprus is big enough, but Scotland's not big enough. And I think what we're seeing just now is, if we can get people to have that confidence, and it's still an issue for us, to try and be objective about it and say, what is it about Scotland, with all its wealth, all its resources, its people, extremely well educated, that makes us uniquely unfit to run our own affairs? And can I tell you, during the European elections, not the last ones, but the ones before, I was at a polling station in Blair Lowgate, and I spoke to this gentleman, or he spoke to me. He's actually quite a well-known person and involved in the snooker world. I'll not mention his name, but he was arguing back and forth about independence. And I said to him, and I've always wanted to ask you, Nemesis, are you saying that Scotland alone in the world is the only place incapable of running its affairs? And he thought for a minute, he goes, yeah, that's what, that is the view of some unionists. There's something unique about Scotland that we can't run our own affairs. But we have to move beyond the position of people in this hall. The Greens, the SNP, everyone involved in Yes, everyone who supports independence. We have to move beyond that position if we are to achieve what we all want, which is independence for Scotland. And the only way, the absolutely only way we can do that is by convincing people who voted no before to vote yes the next time. And if you think about that, sometimes we get ourselves a wee bit obsessed about arguments within yourself. Somebody came up to me a few minutes ago and said, somebody in the march said that you're about to back fracking. I mean, you know, we are sometimes our own worst enemy. By the way, neither would I ever back fracking, nor would the Scottish Government. There has been no fracking in Scotland, despite tremendous odds in favour of it by the big companies that are involved. And there will be no fracking in Scotland. And I know that everyone's impatient for the referendum. Of course they're impatient. I joined in 1984. I couldn't believe, incidentally, in 2014 that we actually got the chance to have a referendum. I was very jealous of one of my sons who became eligible to vote for the first time at the referendum. His very first vote, he gets to vote on independence. I've been waiting for 30 odd years. But we did, I think, a great job. Now that night, if you remember back to that night, and for those that were here in Clackmannanshire, as has been mentioned, you can remember what it was like. The world's eyes were on Clackmannanshire. Literally, the world's eyes were on Clackmannanshire. The international interest was huge. Just as we had been the first to declare in the 1997 referendum, when we supported massively the establishment of the Parliament and its tax-raising powers, we were the first to declare that night, and of course it went against us. I then had to go off to Stirling, part of the constituency which I have, and also to do media right through the night. And in the morning, the last media interview I did was on Radio Scotland. Bill Robertson said to me, "You must be gutted, this is a disastrous result," or words to that effect. And I said, I know this wouldn't necessarily be the same view as everyone here. I said, I'm not. I joined this, and it's still on record, I'm sure you can get an iPlayer. I said, when I joined, we were getting 10 or 11% in the opinion polls, both for the SNP, but also for independence. I said, we've just had a referendum when 45% of people voted for independence. So I'm really encouraged by that, although of course I would have loved it to have been 5% more and to get over that final hurdle. And then he said, but you're saying you can only, this is once in a generation, so you have to wait. I said, well, and this came out recently, I have never said it was once in a generation. You can't say it's once in a generation. Nobody can tell a country when it can decide. If you believe in the principle of self-determination, nobody can tell a country when they can have a vote to decide to be independent. And I said that then, I said it recently to Kay Burley on Sky TV as well. Actually, I said to her, I have never said it was once in a generation. And immediately, the Tories put out a press release, Alan Tompkins, and they found a quote from me saying once in a generation. It was about ScotRail and the Ryder Cup. They put it out. I mean, absolutely absurd. So, there is no question Scotland decides when it wants to decide. If you believe in that principle, established under the UN, that people have got the right to self-determination, nobody can tell us when we can't have it. And crucially, the flip side of that is we decide when we're going to have that referendum. Now, I got in a bit of trouble again with the Tories when I was accused of calling for what they called a wildcat referendum. It's not what I said. What I said, and it was videoed by India Live and Broadcasting Scotland, was that we should never, either in the SNP or the wider Yes movement, not ask for a Section 30 order just because we think they might say no. We can't allow ourselves to, if you like, be defeated before we make that demand for the Section 30 order. They said that was a wildcat referendum. Now, the fact is, we are not the ones that are trashing every democratic institution in the UK just now. The idea of taking lectures from the Tories about what is correct democratically and what's not, to me, is a nonsense. But the simple fact is, if we are to convince those people we need to come across, then we have to carry forward those arguments in a reasonable and courteous way and admit the fact that sometimes people have got different views from us. We can do things that will make us feel better about independence. Somebody posted a tweet the other day saying, Keith Brown is a nice guy, but we need to be a Rottweiler. You need to attack them, get stuck in. Well, yeah, but make us feel better. But what about somebody that's just thinking about coming across to independence? I got an invitation to go to a demonstration about the Boris Johnson prorogation of Parliament in George Square 2 weeks ago. And I spoke at that. The day afterwards, I got an email from a young woman who had voted no in 2014, a lengthy, very eloquent explanation of why she felt she had been lied to in 2014, why she now wanted to both support the SNP, but also support independence. We have to get people coming across and doing that, and we don't do that by shouting at them or telling them they were wrong or stupid in 2014. You have to try and take people with you, and you can only do that by properly explaining things. It's not the easy way, and people can get impatient with it, but it's the only way you're going to win independence. We have to shift that dial. And steady arguments, listen to what people are genuinely concerned about, not dismissing it and saying it's nonsense. If they're concerned about defence, independent Scotland, if they're concerned about the economy, now it's a big issue about the currency we use. I was just saying to somebody, I was lucky enough to have a holiday in Dubrovnik in Croatia recently. Now, Croatia in 1995 was bombed and shelled during the Balkans War. Since then, we were sitting in the square in Dubrovnik, and Ode to Joy was being played by a string quartet, and there was a huge applause and cheering once they'd finished it. Everybody going around a beautiful European city very peacefully. And yet 30 odd years ago, they'd been cowering behind buildings, being bombed and bullets. They are now the newest member of the European Union. They have got real peace. They have, of course, they've just joined the European Union, but they still use their own currency. Surely that's not allowed. Tories tell us you can't do that. But they have done that. Next door, ironically, you've got Montenegro, which we also went to, which is desperate to be part of the EU, but uses the euro. So the point is, being part of the European Union to me is very important. We don't all agree on that, and I understand that point. We have to listen to what people's concerns are about the EU. There are things which I would change about it. But the one crucial thing is that it's maintained peace, relative peace, within the EU for 70 years. Now, that might seem like a trivial thing to some people, because if you've not experienced war, you just take peace for granted. But you try the absence of peace. You try being in Croatia, in Dubrovnik, in 1995, and you'll soon realise how valuable a thing that was. That's a cornerstone of why I support Scotland's right to choose to remain in the European Union. And the one last thing I'll say about trying to convince people is, who can think that the UK is strong and stable? Who can think it's got the mother of all parliaments? The way that they are trashing the rules that they themselves have set up shows the disdain they have for people in this country. So what we can hold out for people is we're going to have a country that's not going to have, and this is incredible to say this in a democracy, the majority of people that make the law are unelected. They're lords placed there by other people. That's not a democracy. You can't have an unelected legislator that makes the rules for people. The ones that are elected are in the minority. We're not going to have £200 billion or Scotland's share of it spent on nuclear weapons, weapons of mass destruction. We're not going to have them in Scotland. And on defence generally, why would we continue to spend £3.2 billion, £2.6 billion, whatever it is, and only have £1.8 billion spent in Scotland? Where are you going to spend it? That's what happens to just now. Many of our institutions, we get levied for the charge, and we don't get the money coming back to us. And the simple fact is, anybody in Scotland can see that we are easily wealthy enough to be an independent country. But the final plea I would make to you is that we do have to try and be respectful to people. You can go to a door, and I've stopped doing it because I'm bad in the Parliament for sometimes with the Tories. I had this thing recently when I just got a bit angry with the Tories, and I said, look, there's the Tories. I remember in 1980 there was a programme on TV called The New Statesman. Some people might remember that. The main character was a guy called Alan Bastard, if you remember that. And I said, and I thought that kind of Tory had died away, and we had nice new Tories. But now in the Scottish Parliament, we've got a whole bunch of bastards. And actually, to my surprise, I got away with it, so I said it again. But the point is, there is no point really in engaging with somebody that's never going to change their mind. I'm not convinced that Murdo Fraser will ever vote for Scottish independence. I'm not convinced that Adam Tompkins will do that, so I'm not going to waste time trying to convince people like that. But there are people that genuinely are making that journey to come across the voting yes. And just think, the last point that was made there about when the declaration was announced in Clackmannanshire, there was people in this room that I know burst into tears at that point. In fact, my older son did exactly that. He'd been involved in the campaign out canvassing in Alloa. And the emotion of that night, the disappointment, because we knew if we hadn't won Clackmannanshire, we weren't going to win Scotland. Although we then got some fantastic results in Glasgow, North Lanarkshire, Western Bartonshire, Dundee, some of the most deprived communities in Scotland. But if you want to, whenever you're inclined to get involved in an argument, think about the next one, and it's coming. The next independence referendum is closer than it's ever been. And if you want to think about when it comes and how you feel on that night. Now, there's a poll done recently which showed 52% of people in support of independence in Scotland. That takes Clackmannanshire over the edge. That takes us into a positive result in Clackmannanshire for independence. And if you want to think about it next time, you want to get involved in arguing with a unionist, or shouting or abusing somebody, and we're never going to win like that. If you want to think about how you'll feel on that night, because it will be Clackmannanshire once again, it will be the first place in Scotland to declare. And I want to be cheering that night. I remember the three unionist parties all slapping themselves on the back and laughing and cheering that night in Alloa Town Hall. The next time it should be us that lead the way in Scotland. And the only way to do it is to bring people across and support independence. So keep up the good work. Well done, everybody. Thank you very much, Steve.
I've been oil drover for many a year, and I spent all my money on whiskey and beer. And now I'm returning with gold and great store, and I never will play the well over no more, and it's stolen.
that's what was going to be happening. So when Nicola very kindly introduced herself to me, she said, "Hi, I'm Nicola Sturdine." Hi, I'm really out of my depth. She's really, really lovely. I got to pour her water for dinner. It was all really normal, so that was really cool. One of the things that we're presenting last night is this Scotland in Brief book, which is put together by Business for Scotland. And it's on the tables over there at the green stand. It is all the actual facts and figures behind the economic case for an independent Scotland. So just if that's something you can flick through, then you can keep those numbers handy. Do we have any climate strikers in the room? Any of these guys, did you go on a climate strike at school? Yeah? Anyone whose kids went on a climate strike? Yeah. The kids know where it's at, young people. So the Paris Agreement says that we're going to work together with nations around the world to keep the climate temperature from rising less than 2 or more than 2 degrees. And this is something that I think everyone needs to take really seriously. We're not saying 2 degrees because 2 degrees is safe. We're saying 2 degrees because at 4 degrees, coastal cities are inundated and we lose all of our coral reefs and there are worldwide shortages of food and water. At 6 degrees, 95% of life on Earth is extinct. Anyone who isn't frightened of global warming hasn't been reading the science. So this is something that the Scottish Greens want to present to you. Climate change is real, it's happening now, and it's something that we need to address. Fortunately for us, Scotland is very well placed to address that, particularly as an independent country. And that's what I want to talk to you about, is the green case for an independent Scotland. Scotland has 25% of all the renewable energy in Europe. We don't need those fossil fuels. You know, people say, oh, we need the money, we need the money. 6 degrees and we lose 95% of life on Earth. But that's okay, because we don't need it. 25% of all the renewable resource in Europe, in the Lower Scotland. We can finally do something to make some money from all this terrible weather. And I think we should talk about making money. I think the Greens often talk about, renewable energy, we talk about sustainable economies, but actually there's no particular reason why we can't make money, why we can't have a really fantastic, thriving economy, while at the same time tackling climate change. And that's why I think this book is really quite exciting. In my day job, so I'm the co-leader of the Scottish Green Party. That's a volunteer role, so I have to work 9 to 5 like everybody else, and my day job is that I'm an engineer with Orbital Marine Power. So we have one of Scotland's largest tidal turbines. Tidal energy works. It absolutely works. And the pitch that I'm always saying to people is, my company and our competitors have all demonstrated that you can generate electricity from the tide, and Scotland has all sorts of strong tides. What we now need to prove is that we can generate money from those tides. And that's the stage that we're at, is commercializing these. Our turbine, the turbine that I'm managing at the moment, will be built in Dundee, at the port of Dundee. So we're bringing heavy industry back to Scotland. Whoa. Yes, absolutely. And renewable energy is going to do it. We have the infrastructure here, we have the shipyards, we have the cranes, we have the docksides. My company's just placed an order for 800 tons of raw steel from Liberty Steel in Motherwell. Companies in Scotland are already benefiting from the transition to renewable energies. We can phase out oil and gas. We don't have to cling on to that. And I think it's up to us who believe in the green movement to be brave and stand up and say, I'm really sorry, you can't burn that oil and gas. Don't argue with me. You have to argue with the glaciers and the bees and the coral reefs. I can't change the physics and science of what's happening to the earth, but we can change Scotland's economy, and we absolutely can do that. So the Scottish Greens are creating the Scottish Green New Deal, which will go into more depth about exactly how we transition from one to another. When I was preparing for this talk and a talk I did recently for a different Yes group, I had a look, and maybe you've had a look yourself, at a list of all the powers that are currently reserved to Westminster. You can look it up on Wikipedia. It goes on and on and on. And I was actually genuinely alarmed when I looked at the list of all the things that Scotland currently can't do, that the people in Scotland essentially have no say on. Because as you know, we send our 59 MPs down to Westminster and they are ignored. The will of Scotland is constantly ignored. So we have no effective say on whether Scotland goes to war. We have no effective say on our own monetary or economic policy. We have no say about certain types of infrastructure, particularly things like export cables for our renewable energy. Now, I'll leave it to you to decide whether you think Westminster has ulterior motives for building something ghastly like the Hinkley Point Power Station instead of putting in the infrastructure we need to
generate renewable energy here in Scotland. And it goes beyond that. We've shown over and over again that when communities have the right to make decisions about what happens to them, they tend to make more sustainable decisions, fairer decisions. Because it's really easy to be unfair to someone you'll never meet. Much harder to be unfair to someone whose kids go to the same school as yours, who shops in the same shops. When you have to look people in the eye and say, I am going to frack under your village, you're much less likely to do it. But the Westminster government is committed to fracking and committed to oil and gas extraction. And that's why we need to have an independent Scotland with an economy based on renewable resources. And we can absolutely do it with the Scottish Green New Deal. So I'm asking all of you to keep up the good work, be bold, be brave, have courage, say we can do this. It's going to be hard, but we can do hard things. And the future is up to you. Whoa.
Just want to show you this cake. Can you all see that? This was donated to us from the shop at Alloa and Maple Court in Alloa. It's a Syrian family who opened up there last year, and they made the best confectionery, and there's some samples that are through the cafe if anybody wants to run through and grab some. Disappear.
I'm James Gill.
Nice to meet you, James.
Brecon.
Nice. From Brecon?
Yeah.
Right, so on the way to Aberdeen. And you've got some nice heather in your side there. Let's just get a nice picture of the heather. That's lovely. Now tell me, please, what do you think of all today's things that are going on here?
Well, I don't actually know about them as yet. I heard about this last week at the Perth March that have come along.
Have you been to a lot of the different marches that have been going on?
I've been to all of them as far as I'm aware.
Okay. So you were at Dunfermline as well?
Yes. Good. And I was at Stornoway.
Yes? Wow, you went all the way up to there. Tell us about the Stornoway one, because we don't know much about that.
It was excellent. The problem was it was a bit expensive for someone who's unemployed.
To get there? How did you get there? Did you go on the ferry or something? You went on the bus and the ferry?
Ah. Yeah. I've got my bus pass, so I can...
Oh, right, so that makes it a bit better. You don't look old enough to have a bus pass.
Before I got my bus pass, admittedly, I used to hitchhike everywhere, so I could still manage.
So how many folk were on the Stornoway?
It's difficult to tell. One of my hobbies is mathematics, but numbers in the real world.
Yeah, I mean, it's very, very difficult to ascertain, isn't it, when you see all the vast ones. I mean, last year in Edinburgh, in October, I mean, I don't know, it seemed to be that there was 1 million people there. Yeah. They said about 100,000.
I wondered if we outnumbered them, in fact, in the Glasgow one, the first one.
Yes, that was May the 4th, wasn't it? There was a lot of folk there. Anyway, but you're passionate about the idea of independence for Scotland?
Yes, in fact, I carry my flag about with me everywhere. I'm a keen walker, and that's with the bus pass, I'm out and about.
Do you find yourself getting into conversations with strangers over this
yes,
year?
It's
currently, what are the kind of responses you're getting?
It depends. Of course, I'm also getting a lot of cars beeping, but for they seem to be mainly good. Of course, we get all the idiots coming up, oh, pure hypocrisy, want independence from England, but want to give our sovereignty to Europe, type thing. And on the street, that's quite often just shouted at you, so you don't have time to get into a proper conversation.
They lose the idea, don't they? Because the European Union is nothing about the sovereignty. Yeah. That's just to do with us all being able to get along together with say the Hungarians getting along with the Dutch is the one I often use, because they're such at opposite ends of the political spectrum, those two countries. So here you are. We talked last week in Perth.
Back here again.
And then we got a little bit of music in the background. 49 seconds of some band from America was being played over the tannoy. And they made me cut half of your thing. Well, not half of it, but 49 seconds of it. And then I don't think you could find yourself, because I only just put it back up this morning. But you were there. What do you think about that kind of thing?
I mean, you should be pleased that they were getting promoted in the back of my video.
Yes, because it was spoiling what you were saying, actually.
That's right, and apart from that, people are going to be looking for me anyway, so they're going to hear the music.
It's quite a small gathering, this one, isn't it? But important for that.
I think we should have more of these. gatherings in some of the smaller towns throughout Scotland. It's all very well 50, 60, 70,000 people turning up in major cities, but this is where the grassroots are. And I think small events like this deserve to be supported, and this is going to take us forward. Every small town in Scotland had a nucleus that what we're seeing here today is going to bode well for the future. It's going to bode well for the fight for independence. I'm Jim Patterson.
Jim, we met, or we at least saw each other at Campbellton a few weeks back, and now here we are in this little place of Alloa. And have you been following the marches around the countryside?
Oh yeah, we were at Perth last week, and that was absolutely excellent. That was one of the best ones.
Lovely sunny day, wasn't it?
Weather, really good speakers, good music, and a lovely march.
And what's your take on the position that Scotland is with regard to independence now?
Absolutely. The earlier the better. So we've got to get away from a corrupt government or administration in Westminster who have absolutely no regard for the aspirations of Scotland. They are completely out with any kind of morality.
How do you think the Tories are going to do if we get this forthcoming general election?
I hope we get wiped out. Absolutely, especially in Scotland, but I hope we get wiped out. To have selected someone like Boris Johnson is just incalculable. I mean, a man that has had real problems getting anywhere near the truth in his whole career. It's just incredible, and he only wants one thing: to make money for very rich people, and it's just appalling.
Certainly not the Scottish way, is it?
There's no empathy, nothing. It's just making money for themselves.
Who's going to start? I think we've already started.
So who are you?
Hello, I'm Fiona with Clacks Women for Indie, and this is our podcast corner here. We've just started a podcast on Indie Live Radio because they were after content. So we thought we'll give them content. So now I'm here trying to capture victims to interview, and I've caught you. So tell us about yourself.
The video that I've been making. So tell me about your Women for Independence.
Right, well, we're Clackmannanshire branch of Women for Independence, and one of the things we're trying to do is bring women's voices into the argument. It can quite often be a very male-dominated, politics can be very male-dominated, and women tend to need, or often need to be invited into discussion. And I have observed if you've got a meeting that's full of half women and half men, and it's thrown open to questions, you can almost guarantee that the first few questions are going to come from men, because women in those kind of mixed forums seem to want to sit back and take their time to come into the discussion. So the idea with Women for Independence is it's a safe space where people can maybe take some time to think, what are their opinions? Because you don't always walk through the door with your opinions fully formed. And one of the things from 2014 that Women for Independence was trying to do was to help women become part of the discussion and part of the debate by making it easier for them to get involved and to think through what their views are. But also, we represent women in the community, in this community, and if it makes it easier for other women to step up and even ask some questions or tell us what they're thinking, sometimes it's easier to do that to a friendly, smiling woman's face than necessarily that. But
yeah, I mean, there's some business between the differences between men and women. I mean, I've always struggled with that idea. I mean, to me, people are people.
They are, but there's something about how people are socialised, and right from an early age, women are kind of taught to be sweet and helpful, and men are taught to get out there and get it and be ambitious. Now, I'm hugely generalising there, and you'd like to think we've come a long way in the last few years, but certainly when I was young, that was very much in evidence. Girls were rewarded for being helpful and kind and sociable, and boys were rewarded for taking risks and being adventurous and sporty.
And we heard Ruth Davison give up her leadership because she claimed it was because of Finn. Now, I can understand that, but on the other hand, Boris Johnson's got myriads of young people all over the shop, and it doesn't seem to affect his life. Now, do you think we could ever move to a position where men and women saw the child caring responsibilities equally?
Oh, wouldn't it be nice to think that could happen? I think that's perhaps perhaps the Scandinavian countries have got more of that going on. But in terms of, it's ironic that in the 70s, the sort of feminist icons, it was all about having it all. And it turned out it wasn't so much having it all, it was doing it all, because we ended up in full-time employment, doing degrees, bringing up children, doing the housework, because we wanted to have the same opportunities as men. And then it turned out, well, actually, you've got the same opportunities, but you've still got to do a lot of the housework.
Mm-hmm.
You're still the one that's going to be, somebody's got to give something up for the children. It's more likely to be the woman. So.
And I often feel that we should take a little bit more time with our children and a little bit more love. And they aren't, are they? Yeah. No. Thank you very much, Fiona. So, Keith, nice to see you. Wonderful speech you made. Now, listen, there was an aspect of that I thought was, just to pick up on, was the way that the media treats this independence revolution, which is on around them. We've seen a lot of criticism from the BBC not covering several of the marches recently. And we've also, every time, for example, Nicola Sturgeon was in the Parliament on Thursday, and as soon as that's finished, they do a little report on the BBC, and then bang in, we get Jackson Carlaw coming in over the top. And actually, to my mind, skewing the whole of what has actually been said. Please, what do you think about that?
Well, I think there are issues in the BBC, and I've written, I don't know how many times now, about some very blatant mistakes they've made. You think about the audience for question time, for example, the representation on a graph of the SNP's vote in European elections, clear misrepresentation. And they subsequently do admit these things, but only after having to go after them and force the issue. Now, there are some very good people at the BBC. I know a number of the journalists here. This is not a generalised attack on the BBC, but they do have a responsibility to give fair representation to the cause of independence, which is very strong in Scotland, to the SNP as the governing party, even things like respect for the First Minister by using a proper name or title. So I think it's important that we stay vigilant on that and we let people know at the BBC, as I do, I write to them all the time. But I don't think we have to make enemies of people in that sense.
No.
But we are a legitimate democratic movement and we deserve respect for that.
I mean, certainly when you see the turnout, I mean, even in this small event today, it's only one kind of little community here. But the number of people who've turned out for it is quite astonishing, and yet there isn't really any representative of the local BBC media here, and that's not just the BBC, is it? It's other organisations too. But we really have to get big time advertising for what we're up to here. And when you see 100,000 people marching through Glasgow, it deserves a little bit more. Anyway, let's move away from that and onto the general malaise that we're in. When I spoke to John Swinney last week, I started off by saying maybe we should talk about eels and the Loch Ness Monster, because that's the kind of game we seem to be in at the moment. And it is a surreal Salvador Dali painting, isn't it?
Well, that and things like the Downing Street dog seem to dominate the news when we're seeing absolutely extraordinary things happen. We've seen a Defence Secretary sacked for leaking national security information and then reappointed to the cabinet.
Yeah, and he was sitting in that classroom with Boris Johnson on the television the other day.
We saw a UK government minister propose a motion in the dispatch box and then go and vote against it. And stay in the government. So, proroguing of Parliament is another example of it. We are seeing extraordinary things happening. And these things are distractions, the Downing Street dog and things like that, but we have to keep focused. And as I said, some of the institutional things in the UK that people will take for granted now, the fact that the majority of our lawmakers are not elected. That shouldn't happen in democracy. The House of Lords is a democratic obscenity. So it's important to keep on taking this message. This is a small place. It's the smallest mainland council in Scotland. And to get a turnout like today, when there's things happening across Scotland, is tremendous. And we should have that reflected in the media. I agree with that. But it's worth doing for its own benefit. People through Alloa would have seen us coming through. And the number of people applauding, cheering, taking photographs, I find that really heartening. So whether or not we get that coverage, we're doing the right thing by engaging with people.
And of course, it is engaging with people on the ground, isn't it? Maybe if every little town in Scotland were to hold something like this. I mean, they go around throughout the year, wouldn't they? Especially when we can do it indoors in a hall where the rain doesn't matter. We could go right through the winter season because the other thing is with Mr. Johnson, him throwing his sweeties about. I mean, where is all this money? I mean, we've been told by the Tories forever it's austerity until we die. And yet now he comes into office and there's £1 million for this and £7 million for the education and blah, blah, blah. I mean, what is this? Well, how are people taken in by it?
This is the Dominic Cummings grand plan, I think, a rushed general election, which they have to have happen before a no-deal Brexit, because the consequences of that, as we now know, through the Yellowhammer papers, are going to be drastic for people, and people will turn against the government that's visited that upon them. That's why they have to try and get this done quickly. And in the course of wanting that election, they are throwing all sorts of promises around. How can you go from this austerity party, saying you've now turned the page on austerity and promise everything under the sun? People don't believe it. I think in Scotland, and I can only speak with any kind of real sense of what's going on here about Scotland, but not so much the rest of the UK, people don't believe this. They're not being taken in by it. Even Conservatives are not being taken in by it, but it's up to us to take that message to people.
It's interesting there, isn't it? Keith, I think I've probably taken too much of your time, and I always do, but it's always a great pleasure to talk to you, and thank you very much for that.
Are you counting them?
I'll play lads.